Welcome to Fun with Annuities with your host, me, Stan the Annuity Man, America's annuity agent. Can annuities be fun? Can contractual guarantees be fun? Absolutely they can. Find out the brutal facts about annuities with no sales pitches or high-pressure nonsense. Just the brutal and factual annuity truth, which is all you need to hear. Let's have some fun with annuities, and let's have that fun start right now. Welcome to Fun with Annuities, the number one annuity podcast on the planet. I'm your host, Stan the Annuity Man, America's annuity agent, licensed in all 50 states. We have a great guest today. His name is Bob Carlson, and I've known Bob for a long, long time. He's well respected in the financial services industry and financial advice industry, but it's bigger than that with him. And I'm gonna run through some of the things that he has accomplished and you need to know about before we get started with this podcast. And I've synopsized this, and it's a lot, okay? But I really took it down to the bare essentials, but the bare essentials for Bob is more than most people ever do in their life. So let's get started with that. Bob is the editor of the monthly newsletter and website called Retirement Watch. He's served on the board of trustees of the Fairfax, Virginia County Employees Retirement System since 1992 and has been chairman since 1995. Oh, by the way, that retirement system has more than $4 billion in assets. He was also a member of the board of trustees of the Virginia Retirement System, which oversees more than $42 billion in assets. He did that from 2001 to 2005. He also served on the Virginia Retirement System Deferred Compensation Plan Advisory Committee. His latest book that was published this year, you need to get it. It's called Where's My Money? Secrets to Getting the Most Out of Your Social Security. He's published other books, including the revised edition of the New Rules of Retirement. He's also co-authored The Personal Finance After 50 for Dummies, and a new edition's coming out this year as well. And he also wrote the classic, I love this title, it's called Invest Like a Fox, Not Like a Hedgehog. That came out in 2007. You need that one. He's written numerous other books and reports, including such topics as the new rules of estate planning, securing your lifetime income, lifetime stream of income, tax-wise money strategies. He's been interviewed by everybody. Every large publication, TV, outlet has interviewed him. He's the past editor of Tax-Wise Money. And just to pile on a little bit more, Bob is an attorney, and he's even passed the CPA exam. He received his law degree and his master's in accounting from the University of Virginia, go Wahoos, go Cavaliers, however you want to say that, and got his bachelor's degree in financial management from Clemson University, go Tigers. Obviously, he likes the Atlantic Coast Conference. But one last thing, just to let you know that Bob is legit. He's also an instrument-rated private pilot. Wow. So welcome to Fun with Annuities, Bob Carlson. How are you?
I'm doing well, Stan. How are you?
That's the best rap sheet I've ever heard of in my life. So let's jump right in. And I'm dying to get your opinion and insight and outlook on a lot of things. Let's go to how COVID and the pandemic has affected retirement plans.
Yeah, this is really interesting. From starting in the 1960s, the average retirement age in the U.S. kept going down and down. And then finally in the late 90s, it started increasing, not rapidly, but steadily increasing. And then during COVID, it flipped back again. One study of Social Security benefit applications found that about 50% more people applied for their retirement benefits in 2020 than did on average in the 4 previous years. Instead of a little under 2 million people applying for benefits, over 3 million people applied. And some surveys of people have all indicated that people who are over 60 are generally saying that they've revised their retirement plans and they plan to leave the workforce earlier than they had previously. Now, some of this is due to people leaving the workforce involuntarily. They lost their jobs, there were no other jobs to go, so they just left the workforce and applied for Social Security. And that typically applies to people 64 and under who retired. But there are others who, they reassessed their life priorities. They figured life is more fragile than they thought it was, and that they didn't have as many years to live as they might have, or it was, uncertain. So they reassessed things. Plus, they looked at, how the stock market and the housing markets really boomed in the latter part of 2020, and figured they're financially in better shape than they had been. So they decided they're going to retire earlier than they previously were, uh, just because they wanted to do things other than work. And they figured they didn't have as many years to do that as they thought they did. So they revised their plans. So it was a big change, and it'll be interesting to see if this continues. Perhaps as the economy does better and wages increase, some of those people in their 50s and early 60s will come back into the workforce for at least
Mm-hmm.
a year or two or three. But perhaps they won't. Perhaps we'll continue this pattern of people looking to retire earlier and doing things other than work. And of course, how the stock market does in the next few years will partly determine that, because if it goes down significantly and stays down, then people will just decide they need to work longer to have that nest egg where they want it. But COVID's made a big difference so far in both actual retirements and retirement plans, and it's going to be interesting to see if that continues.
So this was kind of a retirement wake-up call. As you're mentioning all that, I'm like, I think people just kind of got smacked in the head with a 2x4 of reality of, wait a minute, life's short.
Mhm.
I might need to reevaluate what I'm doing. With all of the foundation that you just laid out, and no one can predict the future, what are possible both positive and negative repercussions from this type of these decisions that were made?
Well, on the positive side, one thing I've told people for years is, while the focus of retirement planning is usually on the financial side, that's really the least important side. And that's not really what determines whether or not you have a successful retirement. What you need to spend at least as much time on in your planning is looking at how you want to spend your time in retirement. You have all this time you spent commuting and working, you're going to have to fill that up. And there's a lot of people, when they retire, they have this list of things to do, whether it's work around the house or travel or things like that. But that's usually done within a year or two.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly they have all this time they don't know what to do with. They might not have enough hobbies, or they've done all the traveling they want to do. They don't belong to enough organizations or other things. So, you know, when we look at statistics in the retirement age people, 65 and over, there's a higher incidence of depression, alcoholism, suicide, all those problems. And it's because people don't plan what they're going to do in retirement. They know what they're not going to do, and they're really looking forward to not doing that. But they don't realize how much time they have to fill. Retirement can last 20 or 30 years these days, and you need a plan, and you need to constantly adjust that plan, because you'll have new interests or lose interest in things you had, or some things you just won't be able to do anymore. So, that's the good part, is that people now are focusing on these non-financial aspects of retirement planning, which they hadn't been doing enough before, and that's a really good thing. On the negative side, people, they just might not still be financially prepared enough.
Mm-hmm.
The stock market went up a lot last year, and a lot of people are, just depending on that staying there or continuing to go up. Interest rates are near zero still. So if you want to take risk off the table and try to generate income from your portfolio, you're not going to do it in the current markets without taking some level of risk beyond what retirees traditionally take. So that's the negative side, is there's still a lot of financial uncertainty, particularly for people who are counting on the stock market to fund their retirement.
Tell people about Retirement Watch, and I've been getting that for a long, long time. It's retirementwatch.com. Am I correct about that?
That's correct.
So retirementwatch.com, I do recommend you going and checking that out. Tell people kind of a brief synopsis of what that newsletter is all about, the frequency. You've been doing this for so many years, and so many people depend upon that newsletter as kind of a foundational piece of advice that they get. Tell people about your newsletter.
Yeah, I've been doing it. We're now in the 30th year. And, another effect of this pandemic is our subscriptions really increased over the last year. So it's become more
Good.
popular and more people recognize they need it. But what I try to do is cover all the financial aspects of retirement, whatever they be: estate planning, investments, income taxes, annuities, long-term care,
Mm-hmm.
Medicare. Anything that can come up in your retirement or your retirement planning. It's basically for anyone 50 or older who's either already retired or seriously thinking about retirement. And the important thing about it is all these issues change. The tax law changes, estate
Mm-hmm.
planning, all that stuff changes. And so what one thing I emphasize there is you have to keep up with the changes and you have to revise your plan. I frequently, when I go to the money show or something like that, I'll run into people who say, I've been retired for 15 years. I really don't need that. And, you talk to them a while and you find out there have been changes that they've missed out on. They don't realize they need to update their estate plan, or Medicare, long-term care has changed, and things of that nature. And
Mm-hmm.
the changes have been much more rapid the last few years, and I think that's going to continue. Both the legal changes and just circumstances in the markets. So, one thing you really need to do with your retirement plan is learn it's not a fixed thing. It's something you have to constantly reevaluate and revise as needed. And if you do it every year or so, you'll make small changes. But if you wait 5 years or longer before you take a serious look at it, you'll find you might have to make some really serious, painful changes as opposed to making gradual changes every year or so.
I totally agree with that. And I guess an analogy, you change the oil in your car, you should at least update and look at your financial plan, et cetera. One of the things that I love about Bob's newsletter, again, retirementwatch.com, just like it sounds, one word, retirementwatch.com. He writes so that anybody at any level understands and can comprehend. It's not, I know he's got his law degree and he's got all these, he's got all of these high IQ things, but he brings it down to where you can really understand it. I think that's a skill that he possesses that not many people do with his IQ. And that's the reason I like reading it. It's fantastic. Let's go to another question that's kind of on my mind. It has to do with DC, and you are a person that you always kind of have your finger on the pulse of what our crazy politicians are doing up there in DC, and obviously that trickles down to the states. But talk about what Washington's doing that could affect retirement planning or retirement plans in general.
Yeah, we have a new administration and a new Congress, and they want to make their mark. So they've got a lot of things they're moving forward. And one of them, in the House Ways and Means Committee on May 5, approved a bill called the Securing a Strong Retirement Act of 2021. And this is known generally as Secure Act 2.0, because you might recall in December 2019, Congress passed what was called the Secure Act. It had a lot of provisions in it. Basically, they wanted a big bipartisan bill, so they looked at a bunch of little bills that different members of Congress had put in, and they just put them all into one so that everybody would vote for it because their bill was in it. And that did a lot of things to expand the ability to plan for retirement, contribute to plans, but it also, on the negative side, to pay for all that, it eliminated the stretch IRA. And that's the big issue for a lot of higher income, higher wealth people with significant IRAs. And
Mm-hmm.
so with the Secure Act 2.0, it's a very similar thing where they have a lot of the small changes that are going to make retirement planning easier for a lot of people. And they're going to encourage businesses, especially small businesses, to put in retirement plans that when they didn't have previously. They're going to provide a tax credit for the expenses of starting up a plan, or there's actually a credit in place. They're going to increase the credit, make it more deductible. But some other things they're going to do, for example, IRA owners age 55 and older can do what they call a catch-up contribution, where they can increase it. Same with 401k. So they're going to increase, first they're going to inflation index it. Those two catch-up contribution limits have been fixed for years. So starting next year, if this law passes, it's going to be indexed for inflation. They're also going to increase it for 401k plans and simple IRA plans. Right now for a 401k, the catch up is $6,500.
Hmm.
That could go up to $10,000. So significant increases there. Also for employees who are 62, 63, or 64 years old, there's going to be another boost in the catch-up contribution just for those years. Another provision that would allow employers to make their matching contributions to a 401k plan based not only on the contributions the employee makes, but also the amount the employee is making on student loans. So for these younger people who aren't saving because they're paying off student loans, uh, this allows the employer to start putting away retirement money for the student or for the former students based on the amount that the students are paying for their student loans. So that's another thing. The amount of the IRA that can be invested in QLACs, qualified
Sure.
longevity annuity contracts, that's going to increase. It will go up to $200,000. And right now there's that percentage limit as well. And
Yeah.
that percentage limit will be eliminated. So more money could go into QLACs. The qualified charitable distribution from an IRA, that's also scheduled to increase under this law. Um, Another factor is employers would be allowed to automatically enroll their employees in the 401k plans. The employees could opt out, but there's a feeling among the researchers and people in Congress that if the default position was people had to contribute to 401ks, most would do it. They wouldn't opt out for it. But when you put a burden on them to elect to contribute and decide how much
Hmm.
to contribute, most just put that on the back burner
Sure.
and they don't do it. So they're going to make it easier for employers to just force employees into the plan and make them opt out of it if that's what they want to do. But these are like with the First Secure Act, these are things that are good, but they're going to cost tax revenue.
Sure.
So Congress has to find a way to offset that. Fortunately, it looks like they're not going to do one big thing like eliminate the stretch IRA as they did before, but they're going to do a lot of little things. For example, when an employer plan allows a catch-up contribution into a 401k plan,
Hmm.
that has to go into a Roth type account after this law passes. So you wouldn't be able to exclude it from your gross income. It would be
Right.
taxed and would go into a Roth type account. So eventually when you take money out, it's tax free. They're also going to be taking steps to encourage movements into Roth type accounts. They're going to allow simple and SEP IRAs to have Roth features, which they're not allowed to do now.
Sure.
Um, they're also going to, and this is kind of a sneaky one, they're going to, for required minimum distributions, these are a big problem for a lot of people who have higher incomes and
Hmm.
substantial IRAs. They're required to take money out of their traditional IRAs. Currently after age 72. They're going to gradually increase that starting age into 75. It's going to increase over 10 years because, the way the budget counters do it is if they just jumped it up to age 75, that would lose a lot of tax revenue in the short
Sure.
term. So they're going to increase it gradually. And anyone with $100,000 or less in total IRAs would be exempt from the required minimum distributions. Now, I say this is a sneaky thing because if you take advantage of it, excuse me, and delay those RMDs for as long as you can, it's going to be a higher amount coming out of the plan because the percentage of your IRA you distribute each year under the RMD is higher, excuse me. And so it's going to be a larger amount, plus your account balance is going to increase.
Hmm.
So you're going to increase your taxes on the back end if you take advantage of delaying the RMD. So what you still want to do is what we've been recommending people do now. And before you have to take RMDs, look at ways of decreasing those future RMDs,
Hmm.
whether that's converting part of your IRA to a Roth IRA, or taking it out and buying a permanent life insurance with the after-tax amount, putting it into a charitable remainder trust. There's a lot of different options you can do. But what you want to do if you have a substantial IRA, if you have income from sources outside the IRA, is you want to work early to reduce what's in that traditional IRA or 401k, so those RMDs in the later years are not substantial. I talked to a lot of people who are in their late 70s or beyond, and they said, you know, I had no idea this was going to happen. These RMDs keep increasing each year.
Right.
It's increasing my taxes. It's giving me higher incomes, so I pay higher Medicare premiums. It's a big problem for people, so you don't want to fall into this trap of delaying your RMDs until they're required. This is a situation where many people want to pay taxes early before they have to, so they're paying fewer lifetime taxes than if they deferred as long as they could. So those are a few of the things in the Secure Act 2. There's really dozens of provisions in there. Those, I think, are the key ones that are going to affect most individuals and small businesses. Right now, it's passed the House Ways and Means Committee. It's not scheduled yet for a vote in the full House, but that'll happen. There's a version of it that's been introduced in the Senate Finance Committee. They'll vote on that probably sometime in the summer. And then late in the summer or fall, the two sides will get together and we'll have the final bill. It'll almost certainly pass by the end of 2021.
Well, that's good to hear. And in 2014, when QLACs were first introduced, qualified longevity annuity contracts, I published the first book on QLACs, and I'm sitting here listening to you, and I've been waiting for it to go through. Once it goes through, then we'll update the books with the book with the minimums, et cetera, and what they're going to allow. But not until they do, not until it passes. But you feel like it's got a really good chance to pass. I mean, this isn't really a political football. I guess they could politicize it. They politicize everything else up there, but I don't see how they can really politicize, because everybody, left, right, center, Republican, Democrat, they're trying to retire and they're trying to live their life and they're putting money away and they have retirement plans. So you're feeling pretty confident about this, right?
Yeah, this came out of the House Ways and Means Committee on a voice vote, which means nobody objected to it.
Good.
And the financial services industry, the tax exempt organizations, all these lobbyists are behind it as well. They're pushing it. Unlike with other legislation, there's really no one out there opposing it. But there's people on both sides pushing it forward that want it to pass. And it's a rare case of bipartisan legislation that seems almost certain to pass unless it gets tied up with some other legislation and gets dragged down by that.
It's hard to call that bill the evil rich bill when everybody has, everybody working, young, old, have 401ks and IRAs and Roth IRAs, and they're trying to accumulate for the future. Another question and I know that some of your books are on Social Security, and I consider you probably, in my mind, and I don't know, I mean, I've been doing this for decades, one of the top authorities on Social Security and just fully understanding it. I think a lot of that has to do with your background, being a lawyer, and the fact that you can take this type of information and then rehash it and rewrite it so the rest of us can understand it. What has the pandemic done to Social Security, and is there a reason for people to consider modifying their plans? Where are you at right now with Social Security and what's happened with COVID?
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting thing because we're waiting for the annual report from the trustees of Social Security. The last one came out, I think it was April 21 of 2020, and included the data through 2019.
Okay.
And one of the things this annual report does is estimate when the retirement trust fund is going to run out of money. Now, we talked earlier about how people retired earlier in 2020. Well, that does two things that are harmful to the Social Security Trust Fund. One is it reduces the payroll taxes going into the fund, because these people that a year ago Social Security thought were still going to be working,
there you go,
no longer are. They're not paying into the system. And then on the other end of it, they're taking out benefits years before Social Security thought they were going to. So the Social Security Trust Fund got hurt on both ends in 2020. So last year they estimated the retirement fund would run out of money in about the year 2034. And there have been some private estimates about how that's going to change, and they all assume it'll end at least 20 years earlier, or 2 years earlier, excuse me. But the numbers coming in about how many people retired earlier and how many going forward are planned to accelerate their retirement plans, they could make this much more than 2 years earlier that the trust fund runs out of money. So it's going to be interesting to see, and I think when that number comes out, which should be very soon, they issue this report every spring. So when that report comes out, it's going to show that Social Security is going to need replenishment years earlier than we thought only a year ago. And when that happens, it's going to be hundreds of millions, perhaps trillions of dollars over 30 years. So these big spending plans that Congress has right now might be put on the side because they might find out they have to shore up Social Security through either higher tax revenues or lower benefits or a combination of the two. And that's something not many people have been looking at. And that's going to be, I think, a real eye-opener for a lot of people. Now, that, as I said, it's going to affect plans in Congress. But I don't think for the most part it should affect individual plans about their retirement, particularly if you plan to retire in the next 5 to 10 years. That's because historically, when Congress has revised the system, it has protected people who are in or near retirement. I run into people regularly who'll say, well, it's going to run out of money, so I'm going to take it while it's there. But, each year you delay taking Social Security, it increases 8%. And that's tax-free, 8% return on your money. And that's compounded over time. Plus, when you retire, you get inflation indexing on top of that. So you get that compounding on top of the higher amount. And when you talk to people who've been retired for a while, the one thing they say is I wish we'd waited. I wish we'd, let that Social Security increase more than it is. And that's particularly important for a married couple when one spouse passes away, because one of the Social Security benefits disappears. The general rule is that whatever the higher benefit coming into the household is, that one will continue, but the other one goes away. So the surviving spouse, whether it's the man or the woman or husband or the wife, has to fund the household on one benefit instead of two. And they might have other retirement benefits that are based on whether or not someone is still alive. Some pensions, they get cut in half if the wage earner who owned the pension dies. So there could be other income that decreases. So, you have to look long term, particularly with a married couple. You have to figure out what's going to happen when one spouse passes away, whichever one it is. So generally, whoever earned the higher lifetime income and is going to get the higher Social Security benefit should delay as long as they can. And, there's a chapter in my book that cites several studies which have found that your retirement nest egg lasts longer, even if you take money out of that nest egg before age 70 so that you can fund your retirement while letting that Social Security benefit increase. Wait till age 70 when it's maximized. That's much more valuable for most people than taking that benefit early so they're not drawing down their nest egg as much. You really need a high after-tax investment return on your nest egg in order for it to make sense to take that Social Security benefit early in order to reduce the amount you're taking from your retirement funds. It's better to take money out of your retirement funds to let that Social Security get that 8% annual tax-free compounding. So my basic advice to most people is that even though Social Security is probably going to run out of money faster than it would have, first thing you need to know is that doesn't mean there's not going to be a Social Security fund or a Social Security program, because the taxes that come in each year from people working pay 75 to 80% of current benefits. So the trust fund is only paying 20 to 25% of benefits. And that's the gap that Congress has to make up. So even if that trust fund disappears, benefits are still going to be paid. If Congress doesn't act, there'll be an across-the-board cut of 20 to 25%. Now, if my benefits are cut, I'd rather they'd be cut from that higher level, from delaying benefits, than from that lower level from taking benefits early. But as I said, I don't think when Congress acts, it'll affect people who are already retired or within 5 to 10 years of retirement. I think it's the younger people who are going to pay higher lifetime taxes and probably get a lower benefit, maybe have their retirement age increased. But anyone who's in the retirement planning stage now, who's very close to retirement, I don't think that should change their plans. I think they should still follow the traditional advice of waiting as long as you can to maximize that Social Security benefit.
And by the way, for people, just once again, Bob's latest book is called "Where's My Money? Secrets to Getting the Most Out of Your Social Security." We'll have a link on to that book on our site. You can go to Amazon and get it as well. Just type in Bob Carlson or "Where's My Money? Secrets to Getting the Most Out of Your Social Security." And I always kid people, Bob, that when people say I hate all annuities, I'm like, you can't hate them all because you already own the best inflation annuity on the planet, and it's called Social Security. One more question about Social Security. Well, there's a ton, but our time is limited. Do you think there'll be means testing for Social Security in the future? Will the evil rich get pushed out of this? What's your opinion?
Yeah, well, there's already substantial means testing.
Okay.
Right now, the amount of benefit you get depends on your lifetime income, but it's not pro rata. Lower wage earners get a higher percentage of their wages in Social Security benefits. People at the bottom of the income scale, they get about 90% of their last wages replaced with Social Security. But the average worker gets about 40% of their final wages in Social Security benefit.
Okay.
People who have earned above the Social Security earnings limit, which is indexed for inflation each year,
Sure.
they only get credit for the wages they earned up to the Social Security tax base, which is around, I think, $120,000, $130,000 now. So, and they get, 10% or less of their annual income in Social Security benefits. So it's already indexed for inflation, for income. In addition, there's income taxes on Social Security benefits, but only as your income goes up. So if you're a low income retiree, you don't pay taxes on your Social Security benefits, but higher income do. They can include up to 85% of their benefits in income. Now, having said that, I still think it's likely Congress will opt to put additional means testing on it. The easiest thing that many people recommend is right now you only pay the Social Security payroll tax on income up to a certain level. And they've already repealed that for Medicare. There used to be a limit on Medicare tax as well. They repealed that a few years back. So it's more than likely they'll repeal that tax limit on the Social Security taxes as well, so that no matter how much you earn, you'll still pay that 6.2% Social Security tax on your wages. Also, I think it's likely that they'll establish some high level of income, maybe $500,000 or $1 million. Well, they just say, if you've got that much income from other sources, we're not going to pay you any Social Security benefits. So I think those are the two most likely ways they'll increase the means testing. Another way is they might increase the income taxes on Social Security benefits for your upper middle class retirees. So yeah, I think they'll increase the means testing. But also I've looked at studies where economists have run the numbers, and that's not going to be enough to solve the problem. They're going to have to do other actions as well.
There's not enough evil rich. This is the
Right.
evil rich clause. And there's, you always kid people, there's not enough evil rich people out there. You want to call them evil. But I want to pick your brain a little bit on, because we're in blue water right now, what I call blue water. We've never seen what's happening. We printed trillions and 7 trillion or however you want to count it. Inflation is the gorilla in the room. And I love when politicians at the time of this taping are saying, well, I don't really see inflation. I'm like, well, I guess you're not buying gas or lumber or food. Um, can you dovetail in and kind of talk about both the printing of the money, which I'm sure you're not a huge fan of, and then secondly, inflation, because that's a topic I get asked about every single day. And as I tell people, annuity companies have the big buildings for a reason. They don't give away anything, including inflation increases. And you already own the best inflation annuity on the planet, Social Security. With that being said, what's your thoughts on the printing and inflation?
Yeah, I've been warning people about higher inflation for the last 2 or 3 years now. Um, my feeling for a while now is we're going to end up doing what we're doing now. Basically, what we've done is we've adopted the same policies that Congress and the Fed used in World War II. We had to fund World War II. There weren't enough taxes that could be imposed to pay for that. So what happened was Congress would spend whatever it needed to, as it's doing now, and the Fed would buy as many bonds as it needed to keep interest rates low. And that's what we're doing now. So Congress is spending whatever it thinks needs to be spent, and the Fed has said it's going to stand by and buy these bonds to the extent the market doesn't buy them. And that's going to put additional money in circulation. And unlike with quantitative easing after the financial crisis, in this scenario we have now, Congress determines where the money goes. Under quantitative easing, the Fed would just buy bonds and mortgages in the markets, and whoever sold them got the cash and decided what happened to it. Now the Congress is, setting up these various programs, deciding who's getting the benefits of these programs. So that's where the money is being directed instead of whoever happens to sell the bonds to the Fed. The Fed's now buying them pretty much directly from the Treasury as they're issued. And, this is, some people call this modern monetary theory. And this is, it's not quite unheard of, but it's pretty much unheard of outside of wartime. And, previously, you knew the policy was going to end when the war ended. Now we don't know when it's going to end. It might end when the Fed decides the economy can go forward without support. But at the same time, Congress has to decide the economy can go forward without all these new spending programs. If Congress keeps spending the money and the Fed decides it's not going to buy the bonds, then interest rates will go up and the economy will go down. On the other hand, as we're starting to see in the data, at some point, this bond buying and spending by Congress results in higher inflation. And the Fed officials say that what we've seen now is just a temporary thing, reaction to the supply chain disruptions that occurred during the pandemic. Once the supply chains are restored, most of these imbalances will be back into balance and prices will be back down to normal. On the other hand, the economy is already pretty robust in most areas. There's just a few now where, because of COVID restrictions, they're still in sad shape. But large portions of the economy are the highest levels they've been. GDP has already gone back to where it was before the pandemic. And so we're keeping funding these emergency programs when the emergency is passed, except for among a few sectors. And this has to, I think, at some point push inflation even higher than it's gone up in the last few months. It might drop down because some of these imbalances are restored, but I think that'll be a temporary drop. I think we've got all this money sloshing around now, and it's just going to keep circulating and pushing up prices of goods and services, especially services. Goods are more sensitive to the economic cycle. Services usually don't decline as much because these are things people have to buy for the most part, no matter what their income's doing. So these services prices have not been very sensitive. They've pretty much gone steadily up no matter what the economy is doing for some time. So if we keep dumping fuel onto the economy and demand for these services increases, then I think those prices are going to keep going up. And as the economy grows, the goods prices are going to keep going up. So I think inflation's a significant concern. And as I said, that's why the last couple years I've been advising my subscribers to add inflation hedges to their portfolios so that they won't be hurt as much by this.
Such as, what are you recommending?
Well, it's a basket
Okay.
basically, because none of these traditional inflation hedges are 100% responsive all the time. But the prime one, the main one is gold,
Mm-hmm.
which I recommend people buy through exchange traded funds.
Mm-hmm.
I recommend the iShares Gold Trust. There's also the Spider Gold Fund. Either one of those is a very liquid, low cost way to own gold and to profit as inflation pushes its price higher. There's also a broad basket of commodities you can get, and there's various ETFs and mutual funds that will own those as well. And that's good as well, because if the economy grows, and that's part of the reason inflation is rising, then these commodity prices will increase as well. I also recommend Treasury inflation protected securities, or TIPS,
Mm-hmm.
which again you can buy very economically through an ETF or a mutual fund. And then the final ingredient is real estate investment trusts. Real estate traditionally has done well during inflationary times, particularly if that inflation is accompanied by strong economic growth, which is what we have now. And the real estate investment trusts, or the REITs, they didn't do well the first half of 2020 because people were concerned about hotels and
Mm-hmm.
commercial office buildings not bouncing back. But REITs are broader. They include things like cell towers and data warehouses and other things that are going to do well in the technology economy, and regardless of what happens with the hotels and the office buildings and that sort of thing. So, and the REITs have done well really since late 2020, and they've actually been leading the market most of this year, doing better than the hot technology stocks in recent months. So that's what I recommend, is rather than trying to make one big bet on an inflation hedge, that you put together a basket of gold, tips, broad-based commodities, and REITs, and just hold that diversification until you think the inflation era is ending or the economy is about to stall out.
And that sage advice is just a tiny piece and a tiny taste of, if you go to his site at retirementwatch.com and subscribe to his newsletter, which I do recommend that you do subscribe, because he's giving this type of specific thoughts on where we're at, and it's timely. One last question, because this has been fantastic, and I know my listeners love it, and we want to bring you on again as things change. And definitely, if the Secure Act goes through, we want to bring you on to talk about that. But all of my listeners are dying to know what you think about cryptocurrency, not specific ones, but just the tulip bulb type craze that has taken over the country, and the volatility. Where do you land with that, Bob? Because you're the most pragmatic financial thinker out there. I mean, there's you and a handful of other people that I just truly trust not to bring their emotions to the table. They're bringing their brains to the table. What do you think about this crypto stuff that's happening?
Yeah, I've been watching it closely.
Mm-hmm.
And there's different types of the cryptocurrencies, and really they have different qualities to them.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing to know about them is they're very volatile, and there's no fundamental factors in them. There's no way you can value them the way you can do a stock or a bond or a piece of real estate. They're basically just based on supply and demand,
Mm-hmm.
and there's such small, thinly traded markets at this point that a small number of people suddenly acting, either buying or selling, can move the price significantly, 10,
Mm-hmm.
30% in a day. So I don't think they're, part of a portfolio at this time. Also, some of these cryptocurrencies, they were never designed to be investments. They're really methods of making payment more efficient, making transactions more efficient. In fact, some of the people in the business, they refer to them as stable coin because the supply is either fixed or it's backed by dollars or something else.
Mm-hmm.
And they were set up just to be a mode of payment. So it's a very diverse sector. But if you want to make money on it, probably, like a lot of other types of investments, there's two ways to go about it. You could try to find a way to successfully speculate in the currencies themselves, trying to figure out a system for buying and selling. Or you can look at the infrastructure, the companies that are facilitating the transactions or just the whole industry as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
The big one, of course, recently is the exchange Coinbase that went public recently.
Sure.
I've talked to people who say, number one, it's probably overvalued. And number two, that there are other exchanges coming on board that are going to be more efficient and charge lower prices and gradually eat away at Coinbase's, base, their customer base. So, it's a very new speculative industry. It's a lot like the early days of the personal computer, where
Sure.
there were hundreds of personal computer companies going public at one time. Some people became millionaires in a short period of time. Most of them lost the money as the companies went bankrupt or were dissolved into other companies. And there were only a few survivors, Dell, IBM, and IBM sold off its PC business too.
Sure.
So we're kind of like that, where it's the early stage of personal computers. There are going to be very few survivors of the people who are out there now. There are going to be a lot of new companies and new technologies coming on board, and it's really tough to make money on it. If you made money on it, you shouldn't consider yourself smart. You consider yourself lucky and kind of get out with your profits. But if you haven't gone in yet and you're looking at it, I would say try to find a diversified way to get into it. Don't try to pick the one big winner.
Sure.
And also look at the infrastructure, like the exchanges, rather than the currencies themselves.
I think that's very good advice, and I don't think we've seen the winners. Who the people that are going to be standing at the very end of cryptocurrency. I think the governments will be involved in some form or fashion. The large banks will be involved in some form or fashion. I've been saying that forever. I think they're just watching the chaos, and they're just picking their moment of when to step in and be the dominant part of the cryptocurrency market. But I do think it's here to stay. I just think it. And I concur what you were saying. Just be careful. And I tell people, just be very careful. And I think your personal computer correlation is the best I've heard, because we can all remember those times, and we can all remember some of the brands that had retail stores that are no longer, and they just came and went. And then there's a few here at the end that survived. So, it has been an absolute pleasure for you to be on the Fun with Annuities podcast. Once again, I want to encourage my listeners and viewers, because once again, we're on all major podcast platforms, all the ones you've heard of. So welcome to all those people riding in your car and running on the treadmill. And also, this is on the Fun with Annuities YouTube channel, where you can see Bob and I looking at the camera. And Bob hasn't aged. I have. Somehow Bob has not aged. I'm not sure how that works. But go to his site, retirementwatch.com, just like it sounds, one word. He has arguably the best financial advice newsletter. I'm not even sure. That doesn't do it justice, okay? But it's something you need to have if you're serious about your money and making good decisions and having a legitimate rock star third-party advice. That would be Bob Carlson. And also make sure to pick up his latest book. It just came out, and it's called Where's My Money? Secrets to Getting the Most Out of Your Social Security, which I think is a must-have, especially in these times that Bob was laying out just what's happening with Social Security. So with that being said, Bob, thank you so much. Any last word before we end this fun today?
Well, I just emphasize a point I made earlier that all these financial matters change. Even when you think you know it, it's about to change. So never think you're locked in, that everything's set. Always be looking, for what's going to change and how you need to respond to it.
And ladies and gentlemen, that is Bob Carlson of retirementwatch.com, and he is a rock star. We're going to have him on again, but I really appreciate you joining us on the #1 annuity podcast on the planet. And I'm your host, Stan the Annuity Man, and that podcast is called Fun with Annuities. Thanks for listening to Fun with Annuities. Please hit the subscribe button and make sure to go to my site at theannuityman.com, where you can run your own SPIA, DIA, and QLAC quotes and see a live feed of the best MYGA fixed rates in the country, and even get indexed and income rider quotes as well. You can also sign up for my 6 Annuity Owner's Manual books, and I'll ship them for free and under no obligation. I also encourage you to schedule a one-on-one call with me, Stan the Annuity Man, so we can have a full discussion of your specific situation. It will be the best brutally factual and truthful advice you will ever get, and that's one guarantee you should definitely take advantage of. So join me next time for the #1 annuity podcast on the planet, Fun with Annuities.